All right, folks, how you doing? Welcome back to Tribe of Judah. So we're carrying on part 3 of History of the Scottish People, 1560 to 1820, based on when Scotland was Jewish. Disclaimer, under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowances made for fair use. Oligopolistic and oligopolistic partnerships. Try saying that when you've had a few. And in each of these industries, specific families came to dominate the trade, often forming oligopolistic partnerships with family members residing in ports such as Bordeaux, Rouen, Cadiz, Lisbon, Warsaw, Rotterdam, London, Barbados, Danzig, Stockholm, Bergen, the Canary Islands, and Riga. Port Jews. Judaic scholars have often pointed to the phenomenon of court Jews, figures primarily located in Central Europe, serving kings and princes as bankers, tax collectors, and army provisioners. But it was not until the 1980s and 90s that historians began to revisit this subject and focus attention on the Jews who settled on the Atlantic seaboard. The designation of Port Jews was born. Sephardim of Spain and Portugal, in cities ranging from Trieste to Glasgow, from Salonika, I think, to Hamburg. The social type of the previously overlooked Sephardim of Spain and Portugal was thrown into high relief. Of them, we learn that, quote, they eschewed the traditional autonomous Jewish community and enjoyed improved legal status. They questioned Jewish religious tradition, having been estranged from it for so long, and displayed a form of ethnic Jewish identity. Court Jews, and, quote, the distinctive role of Sephardim as precursors of the Enlightenment, who experienced emancipation as a gradual development, has been, relatively speaking, ignored. The Scottish Burgess system in many ways combined court Jews and port Jews. Okay. Merchants and craftsmen. In each borough, there was one basic division into burgesses and non-burgesses, and not another within the burgess groups between merchants and craftsmen, organized into a merchant guild and craft guild, respectively. To the burgesses alone belonged the privileges of being members of a borough. The rest of the inhabitants were mere indwellers with no more right to elect the magistrates, to trade, or to belong to a craft than a country bumpkin from the landward parts. New burgesses. A man could become a burgess in several ways. Normally, he had to pay some money to the corporation and to prove that his name was upon the apprenticeship books of the town. In the 16th and 17th centuries, most new burgesses were either sons or the sons-in-law of existing burgesses. Apprenticeship. Sons could follow their fathers, paying a smaller entry fine and serving a shorter apprenticeship than strangers. Those who married the daughter of a burgess gained the same concession. It was a way of making certain that the daughters of merchants and craftsmen were at a premium in the marriage market. Others had to wait for a period after they had finished their apprenticeships. The Merchant Guild. Strangers and outland men, however, no matter how well qualified they might already be as merchants or craftsmen in other boroughs, had to pay quite heavily for admission. The first purpose of the Merchant Guild was to maintain a monopoly within a monopoly, to preserve from ambitious craftsmen and unfreemen, both within and without the borough, the community's right of foreign trade that only a free merchant burgess could enjoy. So basically a system of snobbery and corruption. Edinburgh to a T. And when you go into Edinburgh, particularly in the Canongate area, the lower Royal Mile, you see buildings which used to be, the townhouses, mansions of wealthy merchants. And even in places like the Westport, if you're looking closely, you see through the symbolism where all these craft halls used to be. I think one of the images I used either in this presentation or the one previous was from Forest Road, the Oddfellows Hall. Doesn't exist anymore. I think it's a Japanese restaurant now. But there was a lot of this in Edinburgh, I can tell you. So it's kind of surprising to me that Edinburgh is only very briefly touched on in this book. It's almost ignored, actually. They're going into Stirling and Ayr and Glasgow and Aberdeen, and yet Edinburgh gets like mentions here and there. And yet it was in Edinburgh that you found this all over the place. So and there you have it. Anyway, thanks for watching.